Our mission at SD Bullion is clear: the lowest cost gold and silver available online. While we do not have pretty blue boxes, free shipping, 4% credit card fees, or glamorous gold and silver infomercials, SD Bullion has the lowest prices that may save you hundreds on your next order. So before you make your next investment, do the math and join the over 15,000 new customers who have recently made the switch to SD Bullion. Why pay more?
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with FinanceAndLiberty.com, and back with us today is Andy Hoffman from MilesFranklin.com. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. I think we've been doing podcasts for at least 3 years now, and I still love coming on every time.
Well, it's been great to have you on the show these past few years. The first topic I'd like to address today is that in a recent article, you recently said that you don't believe there's a chance the world can survive 2016 without a catastrophic financial event. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this?
Yes, and again, I'm not typically one for predictions, again, because I'm not even in a financial planner or anything. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm simply someone working in the bullion industry with a lot of background on Wall Street and financial markets who just sees the writing on the wall around me. And, it's rare that I feel so emphatically, but I felt this way. It's not just today. I've been saying this for the past at least month, that it's quite clear that the telltale signs that, we're seeing a loss of control of financial markets, economies, and even political and social backgrounds in most of the world. It's telling me that it can't be long before things really fall apart. And it's, the thing that really drove it home, aside from the collapse in commodities and currencies, is the fact that in recent weeks, it seems like every time central banks say anything, let alone do anything, it gets the polar opposite response of what they typically have gotten. Usually, the central bank says we're going to lower interest rates, we're going to do QE. They get markets to go up, and not only that, they usually have PPTs and gold cartels working with them to make these things happen. So when the Bank of Japan went to negative interest rates and the Japanese stock market promptly plunged 20%, or when the ECB expanded NERP as well and the European markets collapsed, or when Janet Yellen got on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, and which is what I've always called a key attack event for the cartel, and the next day gold went up $60 and the markets plunged, it's pretty clear that the credibility of central banks is at its end game. And you combine it with all the debt that's out there and the worst global economy of our lifetimes, and you just say, well, what could they possibly do to reverse it? They're certainly trying today. It's a holiday here in the States. They met this weekend and said, we're going to destroy gold on this paper-thin Monday holiday. But you know what? All it's going to do is drive further physical demand, because more and more people in the world know exactly what's going on now.
You recently were on the SGT report, and you talked about how gold and silver seem to be trading more freely than you've ever seen them trade before. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this?
Yes, more freely, and that on Thursday, which was, that was a historic day. Again, the day before, Janet Yellen was on Capitol Hill talking about how, they're in control. And the next day, gold went from $11.90 up to a high of close to $12.60. And then, and silver did jumped as well. I forgot by how many percent, maybe 2 or 3%. Conversely, stock markets fell. And in fact, the stock market fell in the same kind of patterns that gold and silver typically are hit down. And gold and silver rose with the same kind of algorithm patterns that the Dow usually is supported with. They didn't lose, obviously. They're still there suppressing. They kept capping on Thursday, the gold and silver markets, and Friday. And then, of course, this morning on the holiday paper-thin trading day, they went to town on paper contracts starting first thing Sunday night and then 2:15 a.m. Even here at 10 a.m., the typical attack time here, markets are closed here, stocks, bonds, and still they attack gold. So it just shows you how desperate they are. But the fact is, you're starting to see gold and silver resist the cartel far more powerfully than they ever have. And what's backing that up, of course, is the fact that physical demand the world round is exploding. And more importantly, people are onto what's going on. There's a reason why last week, after that fraudulent silver fix in London, where they actually had the gall to set the price. And why they even have people setting a price when you have a free market, I don't understand. But they set the silver price 6% below the prevailing price, and that the day before options expiration, obviously to protect somebody. And the very next day, 6 of the Category 5 miners on the LBMA quit. They abruptly quit after all these years, including Rio Tinto, the second largest miner in the world. Again, even the miners are starting to realize that this is all fraudulent. And as a result of that, it's not a surprise, and I called that event, by the way, the biggest news in gold market history, and sure enough, the day later was when gold went up $60. So again, you're seeing some gargantuan battles that are picking up steam in the world of reality versus fraud. And I, for one, am not the slightest bit worried about today. I think it's just a buying opportunity for people looking to protect themselves, because all they're doing now is making it more obvious to the world that they're desperate. And by the way, I've said all along about the dichotomy of gold and silver, how the people in the world who desperately need it right now because their currencies are collapsing can't get it. Again, the average currency is at an all-time low or near an all-time low, in some cases way below their all-time lows, and people in those countries are clamoring for gold and silver, but they can't get it. In fact, I got an email this morning from someone in Japan who said, can you ship gold over to Japan? It's so expensive to buy it because the premiums have gone to the roof. It's not worth buying it here. And silver we can't even find anywhere. So again, in Japan, where they're desperate for it because of what the Bank of Japan's doing, they can't get it. Whereas over here, where people should be desperate for it because all the signs are we're going in that direction, people don't want it as much, and therefore you can still buy it at these subsidized prices. And I assure you, it won't stay that way for long.
So what do you see happening in the stock market? It seems like right now we're seeing the stock market crashing. Do you see the stock market will continue to collapse?
Well, look, my audio blog last Thursday was called "The Very Last to Go Are Going." And what I'm saying is the markets that are most violently manipulated to give a perception to the world that all is well, one being the gold cartel holding gold and silver prices, and the other being the PPT holding up major averages like the Dow Jones propaganda average. You're starting to see them, as you're saying, lose control because, yes, technical analysis doesn't mean that much anymore in a rigged world, but it certainly means something when an average like the Dow is breaking support in all ways, despite the PPT's efforts, because of course there's a lot of black boxes out there that trade off of that. And as a result, you're seeing a bad breakdown of financial markets. I mean, the rest of the world has been in a bear market for some time. Here in the States, the average stock is certainly in a bear market, and some are, that is down more than 20%, and thousands of stocks are down well more than that. It's just that they've kept the Dow and NASDAQ at just under that 20% threshold with this manipulation, but it's still a bear market. It's still stocks falling no matter how much they try. And, again, Friday you had the comical, let's pretend that Deutsche Bank is healthy by doing some fraudulent debt buyback, which even if they did it would be an incredibly dumb thing to do. The last thing you want to do when there's a liquidity crisis is spend your liquidity buying back stock and bonds. But again, they're fighting their battles. It's the death throes. It's exactly what we are seeing in the Deutsche Bank stock individually, in stock markets like the Dow, these spasms of manipulated surges higher. It's exactly what we saw with Lehman Brothers and Enron and all those companies as the powers that be desperately try to prop them up. But I suspect that this trend is a lot bigger than a couple of days of pushing gold back down and pushing the Dow back up because nothing has changed. I mean, you talk about overnight, the news that's come out over the weekend. Well, for one, they're about to start World War III in Syria, between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. For two, you had 10,000 Greeks protesting in Athens because they're trying to, if you can believe this, double the income taxes and triple Social Security taxes so they can pay off the troika in their austerity demands. And then, of course, Japan just reported a worse than expected fourth quarter GDP contraction, so they are in recession. And the best yet was, again, think about the concept of gold falling $37 on the news that overnight they reported January import and export data. Imports were expected to be up 4%. They fell 14%. Exports were supposed to be up 4%. They fell 7%. So this is why we're supposed to believe gold fell $37 and stock indices surged. Again, it's just a last second, as I call it, the President's Day desperation raid to try to restore stability, but it's not going to work. The bigger trends are at play here.
So recently, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, has said that the Fed might slow the rate at which they increase interest rates. So do you think this is what they're going to do, just slow the rate at which they increase interest rates? Or do you think they could actually decrease interest rates?
Oh, they're going to lower interest rates. Again, I mean, this topic has been beaten to death by myself and many others. The only reason they even raised the interest rate, and comically, it plunged right before year end, which is the most important day of the year because that's when all the banks set their books based on what their money market rates were saying about their asset valuations. But the only reason they did it is because they spent the last 3 years saying we're in a recovery, and it was exactly a year ago in December of 2014 where Janet Yellen said we will be raising rates within 3 months, and they were 12 months from then. And they sat down in their meeting and said, look, if we don't raise rates now, people are going to completely call us out for the lie that we've been saying all these years. So they attempted it. And I said beforehand, Google it. In September, I wrote the only financial event as potentially cataclysmic as a significant yuan devaluation would be the Fed raising rates. And sure enough, just like markets collapsed right after the Chinese devaluation started, markets collapsed the second that the Fed raised interest rates. And now, look where we were. I mean, that was in mid-December. Think about how much worse the world has been since those 2 months. I mean, you collapsing commodities and currencies and economic data and stock markets and bond markets. Everything is falling apart. So, again, Janet Yellen said on Capitol Hill just last week, they're considering negative interest rates. And how could they not? Because everyone else is going negative interest rates. In fact, I wrote today my article. It's about the upcoming calamity of cashless societies and negative interest rates. The whole world's going to be at negative interest rates soon, including the Federal Reserve, probably sometime later this year. But again, I'm not predicting a date, but there's no way the Fed's raising rates. I mean, they've already shown that if they raise them a quarter point, especially when everyone else is lowering them, it's like putting a gun to their own head, especially during I might add, an election year. So, no, the Fed is not going to be raising rates. It's shockingly stupid that they did it in the first place. And, if anything, I would expect that they'd be lowering rates by year end. And if the markets continue to spiral out of control, they'll do it sooner than that.
So mentioning the election, how do you see the collapsing economy impacting the election?
Again, it's not necessarily the collapsing economy this year, although it's certainly throwing fuel in the fire. It's basically... and I can even say it's not even the 8 years. It really goes back to the turn of the century. The fiat Ponzi scheme peaked at around 2000, and then it broke in 2008. And since then, it's been all games of kicking the can, which has only made things worse. But particularly in the last few years, things have gotten so bad that it's gotten to the point where the people, not just in America but everywhere else, are voting for non-traditional candidates. They're voting for demagogues. They're voting for people who promise crazy things like Bernie Sanders, or people who talk tough like Donald Trump. I mean, and this is going on in other places. Look what's in Spain, in France, what's about to happen. All parts of the world this is happening. There's going to be an impeachment in Brazil, et cetera. So, to me, I find it hard to believe that it won't be one of these new type of candidates like Bernie Sanders or Trump, and probably Trump, to be honest with you, because Sanders is such a borderline communist. But, it bodes badly for incumbents of all kinds. It's not a Republican Democrat thing. It bodes badly for traditional government types, and it bodes well for new alternative types, even if those new alternatives are most likely as bad or worse than what we have now.
Do you see these new alternative candidates still continuing with the fiat Ponzi scheme?
Well, of course, they have to continue the fiat scheme, because if you take your foot off the gas pedal for a second, the whole thing implodes, and no one wants things to implode on their watch. That said, things are imploding, and they're past the point of no return. So, what these guys or girls do depends entirely on what is going on around them. I mean, if we have, let's say, a market crash, they'll do one thing, or let's say there's a big terrorist attack. Their priorities change, as all governments do, in a reactive manner. Whatever is going on, they react to. And if really bad things happen, and you have very uncontrolled politicians with a very loose constitution, they can do very scary things. And, that's why I have a far greater fear of people like Trump and Bernie Sanders than I do of people like Hillary Clinton or Mitt Romney. The establishment are evil, but at least they're politicians. And a lot of these people are very, very unpredictable and demagogish. And, that's what scares me the most. And it's, something I didn't, predict it a while ago. It doesn't take much to predict it because that's what happens everywhere. It's happening around the world. Look at Greece. You get a guy like Alexis Tsipras compared to what was before him. And, the next guy is going to be crazier than him and will eventually do something that will, create a really cataclysmic situation.
Now, you also have talked about in a recent article you wrote about how Japan will actually be the first world nation to experience 21st century hyperinflation. Did you want to discuss why you think it'll be Japan who will experience hyperinflation first?
Yes, and I've said that for some time, simply because, look, the whole thing with Japan is they're pretty much the oldest nation on earth. I think on average they're about 10 years older than the rest. And the only country that's older than them is Monaco, which is just because it's people retiring over there. But the reason is, in Japan, because of their demographics, they had the typical fiat currency Ponzi scheme ramp up 10 years earlier. And that's why their stock markets peaked in 1989 versus ours in 1999. And that's why their QE started in 2006 or 1996 versus 2008 over here, et cetera. So they've just had 10 years to build up the debt colossus and inflation colossus that we have they've had 20 years to do what we've had now 10 years to do. And as a result, they are at the edge of the abyss. They have a 300% or so debt to GDP. They have this horrible demographic where there's more people, far more people that need to be serviced than are servicing. And of course, the Bank of Japan is destroying the yen at a rapid rate, at the same time that all the other nations of the world are falling apart. So it only is accelerating, their process of destroying the yen. So, I mean, look, we're all these fiat currencies in one way, shape, or the other are going to collapse. Some, like Venezuela, will completely hyperinflate. Some will just lose a lot of their purchasing power before the ultimate, let's call it reset, when you have a new monetary system. And Japan, for the first world nations, is so far ahead of everyone else in terms of being near the abyss that it's quite obvious that they're going to be the first to go. In my mind, I don't even consider them a first world nation anymore. I think they're bordering an emerging market right now, and frankly, because of those demographics and debt, it's pretty scary to think of what the future is for the Japanese.
So how fast do you see the hyperinflation spreading to other countries and eventually the United States?
Well, again, hyperinflation is how much money you print. And by that definition, you're seeing it in a lot of places already. And again, I can't emphasize enough, because when people hear that term, they just think of wheelbarrows full of money like you are seeing in Venezuela right now. But it's not just that. I meof that's the final end stage. But again, the average currency around the world, as I said, is at an all-time low. I mean, big nations where 90% of the world live. Look at the BRICS. The rupee's at an all-time low. The Brazilian real, the South African rand, the Russian ruble. That's 4 out of 5, and the only one that's not is the yuan, because it's pegged to the dollar. And as I predicted, they started the process of depegging, and I think they're going to take it down a lot further because their economy is collapsing. So you're talking about billions of people in the world have seen an exploding cost of living. Even in Canada, where their oil industry is collapsing, that's, quote, deflation, because the Canadian dollar is down to, I think, a 15-year low. People are suffering inflation of imported goods, which is exactly what you're seeing in all these places, including Japan. So again, there's no such thing as deflation versus inflation. There's both going on at the same time. Typically, inflation of things you want, inflation of things you need, and deflation of things you want, and that's what's going to keep going on until first the low end, the third world nations' currencies have gone first. A lot of the emerging markets are going, and now even some of the first world, from Japan to the euro, are going. The English pound is down near its all-time low right now. People don't know this; they're not even watching. So again, how long will it take? How much longer can these reindeer games support the system when you see it visibly falling apart in front of you? I don't think it's that long. And that's why I said I can't imagine we can get through 2016 without a major catastrophic event. By the way, which in many countries already has happened. I mean, if you lived in Brazil, you would say, yeah, we already had our major financial cataclysmic event. But unfortunately, I think it's going to get a lot worse.
All right. Well, Andy Hoffman, thank you so much for your time today. I guess before we let you go, did you want to share where people can find you on the internet? And I know you're also hosting a couple of conferences coming up. Did you want to tell them a little bit about that as well?
Sure. And of course, I write every day at milesfranklin.com for free, and I'm podcasting like crazy, like never before. And again, this year, myself and Andy Sheckman, he's the president and co-founder of the firm, we've started a nationwide touring speaking series where we're really just doing Q&A rap sessions. It's not presentation. We just sit down for 3 or 4 hours and people ask us questions. We did the first session in Denver last month. There were 130 people. And now we have 2 dates scheduled upcoming, again, entirely free. Friday, February 26th in Minneapolis, Wednesday, March 16th in Phoenix, and I will shortly be booking a late April date in Florida. Details to be announced. If you want to go to those again, February 26th, Minneapolis, March 16th in Phoenix, just email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com or give us a call at 800-822-8080.
Are there any last thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, I write as much as anyone and I talk as much as anyone. My thoughts are, for gosh sakes, protect yourself. It couldn't be clearer that things are falling apart around us everywhere. It couldn't be clearer that the draconian government responses like negative interest rates and cashless societies and capital controls are all going to accelerate as well, particularly when you start to see some really dangerous people get into government, socialists and nationalists and Nazis and all kinds of things. It's coming to a place near you. And if you're someone, for instance, like in Japan, who can't buy silver anymore, it's too late for you already. But if you're in a place like the United States or Canada where you still can, well, for gosh sakes, get it. And not just gold and silver, but prepare yourself for what's coming, because preparing for the worst and hoping for the best is always a prudent strategy.
Well, Andy Hoffman, once again, thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you, as always, Elijah.
Click here to watch Reluctant Prepper's latest interview with Andy Hoffman, Marketing Director at Miles Franklin. Andy Hoffman returns to Reluctant Preppers to answer first, how long can physical silver sell below production cost, and what will cause the price to be unleashed? Second, what place should precious metals take in a preparedness strategy? And finally, how can serious individuals find out solid insights from experts on gold and silver with no cost or obligation?